Ready to roll? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I guess you've noticed I'm not Jeff, and if you haven't, you can tell because I'm shorter. See, I love starting out with dumb dad jokes, things like that. There you go. And there it is. But in any case, Jeff asked me to teach for him. He would be away. And so he asked me to jump into Ecclesiastes chapter 3, which unfortunately I forgot to send out a text yesterday, even though I was working on this yesterday. The text somehow eludes me sometimes when I'm in the middle of teaching in the quarter. I still forget to send out a text. So I apologize, but of course, a good rule of thumb is when in doubt, next chapter, which is what's going to happen pretty much in this class every week. Next chapter. So I hope you've read chapter 3. I did think it was interesting that a large section of what I'm supposed to teach this morning was covered by Andy Cantrell in its gospel meeting. So if you want to know about those verses, just go listen to those sermons. You'll be in good shape. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to skip them. Again, another bad joke. But and y'all are clearly not awake because you're not laughing or anything. No, just kidding. But as we get into the text, of course, he points out the theme of the book, Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 14. That says, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. That reality is just saturating this book. It's found in every chapter pretty much. It's found in our chapter today. We'll see it, and I hope that I can do a good job. I do not feel like I will do nearly the job that Jeff could do. When you are teaching a class and had time and, months to kind of saturate yourself in it, you kind of get a flow for the book and a feel for it that I'm just kind of starting to get a feel for as we're into the study, but I will do my best. If you would, please bow with me and we'll begin in prayer. Our kind and loving Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day you've given us. We're thankful for the fact that you have allowed us to come together to worship you, to study your word, and to gain knowledge and wisdom from it. We realize that your wisdom far surpasses ours in every way, and that it helps us as we live our lives here and help us to gain much as we talk about the times of life and how this life is often a struggle and what it means to have you as our God and for you to be in control. Help us to understand this and grow from it. All this we ask and say in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, can I have 3 volunteers very quickly to read 1 slide each? Okay, Jordan, Buddy, and Art, and I'll get you next. Okay, go ahead, Jordan.
For everything there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. Tear, time to sow, time to keep silence, and time to speak, time to love and time to hate, time for war, and time for peace.
Okay, buddy.
What gain sorry, buddy.
What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of men to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in man's heart. Yet, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all of his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear him before him.
the Son, that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. But for what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place, all are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for this is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him?
I think one of the mistakes I've made with this, not just this chapter, but the book in my study of it through the years, is to perceive it basically as being very pessimistic, but I'm not really gaining that now. I think there is a lot here that goes way beyond what may be, seen to be presented in the text. When in fact, sometimes it is a matter of translation, sometimes, determining how some very difficult words are to be translated in these passages, and we may touch on that. But in any case, he begins, of course, with the theme, or not the themes, the times of life in verse 1. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And so I would simply say, as we look at this, we should understand that, and understand what I mean by this word, life is rarely, if ever, exceptional. And what I mean by that is, rarely does anybody have an exception as far as their life is concerned in relationship to these matters. These are things that everyone is going to face. And we need to realize that, because this pattern, this order that God has set in place has its ultimate purpose in the grand scheme of God. And so that's kind of what I get from that. And so as we think about it, I mean, you and I should understand that life has kind of a natural rhythm to it. There are aspects that are going to come, that are going to go, that are going to change as we go through life. And I think the quicker we understand that, and I tell you, this book, and I think sometimes because there is a time and a season, I have come into the time in my life where this book makes a whole lot more sense than it ever has before. It is so much more applicable to me and what I'm dealing with, and what it is screaming at me, in every chapter to understand than I think I could really relate to as a much younger man. And so, I was told so many things, as I was younger. Well, life is this, life is that. Well, sometimes you don't really get that till you get older, and then you see it. Yeah, personally, yeah, life is this, life is that. And that's what I think Solomon is getting at, trying to get at in relationship with this. And so, how we accept that and how we're going to deal with the times and seasons of hand is going to affect how we view life. It's going to affect our enjoyment of life. And so these are some things to think about. And so chime in anytime you want. I'll ask questions when I can. There's so much to cover. I mean, I could see us easily spending the whole class in the first 8 verses. I mean, it's just a lot. I mean, Andy Cantrell spent a whole week of sermons on it. And so there's so much here to think about. And yet I think he would like me to finish the chapter. So we're not going to be able to discuss as much as I would like. We're going to move along. But when and if you have something to say, I may not be able to take everybody's comment every time, because we won't get through any of this if we do. But we will look at most of this as best we can. All right. So, here he presents the experiences of the times and seasons, the events of life, and he presents them in 14 different contrasts. And in these contrasts, one part's positive, you might say one part's negative, one joyful, one sorrowful. These are things of life. These are aspects of life that are contrasts, that are seasons in which we all, deal with, we all face. And again, notice first of all, there's time to be born, there's time to die, there's time to plant, there's time to pluck up. what is planted. There's no exception to that, folks. I mean, as far as this world is concerned, if you're in this world, it's because you're born into this world. Life comes in. There's a time in which life comes into this world, but there's also a time for life to depart from this world, you know, birth and death. That is the reality of all that lives in this world. And in connection with that, there's a time for planting, there's a time for uprooting, maybe in that case for harvesting. But, you know, what does that tell us? I mean, how does that affect how you and I might look at life? I mean, if that's the reality. Is that how the world wants to approach life? Time to begin, time to end? What do we find ourselves striving against? It's not birth. What? Death. Yeah, is that what you said, death? Yeah, we fight it. It's a fight. You know, I mean, think of all the things we do. You know, we eat healthy, we exercise, we kind of, you know, we go out, we walk, we do all that. I get that. I do those, well, some of those things. I was going to say the exercise, the walking, all that. Yeah, the eating healthy, somewhat. But, you know, as always been said, if I'm going to die, I'd just die happy, rather than just eating healthy. But that may not make me very happy. But in any case, you know, think about that, and how does that then affect life? Okay, buddy?
If we know this stuff's going to happen, we can prepare for it. We can't go through life being unprepared for everything all the time. That's a failure on our part.
True.
We got to prepare for that. We got to prepare for God. We got to prepare.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Also mentioning that when you're in the time to mourn, it's not always going to be like that.
Okay.
There'll be a time that you'll dance.
Okay. Yeah, that's going to come. Yeah, you're getting ahead of me. Slow down. No, but that's a good point. I was going to make that point because I think that's important, very important to understand. Life's not always sorrowful. There are going to be times, but there are going to be times of happy, and we need to understand that. Yes, very good. But I think something I've come to realize is, folks, my life, you know, and I've known this all my life's going to end. I understand that. But the reality of seeing my mortality now than I have ever seen in my life, you know, can either make me bitter or I can accept that reality and go with it and understand that's just part of life. You know, I wasn't brought into this world to live eternally here. And so I have to determine, you know, what I'm going to do with that to see, you know, how I'm going to approach it. And I think I didn't turn my phone down. Am I going to approach it that this is all there is to it, and therefore, you know, I'm going to strive to keep it as long, you know, bitterly hold on to it. And so, you know, it does affect how we approach our life, you know, and just accept that and realize that and learn to enjoy, as I said, all that's there. Okay, yes, quickly, and then we got to move on.
I was just going to say that the one thing that makes this list the most striking to me is verse 11, where it says, his kind of conclusion about all this stuff is that there's beauty in all of it.
Yeah.
He made all things beautiful. And
Yeah.
you look at that list
Yeah.
and you go, what's the beauty in wood?
Yeah.
The beauty in loss.
Yeah.
And tearing
Yeah.
and hate.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to come to play in all of this, to Solomon's wisdom, seeing the bigger picture and what he's revealing to us. Okay, now in verse 3, he says, now, you know, there is a time, you know, to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. Here, you know, when he says a time to kill, I mean, folks, think about that. What does he say? Sometimes you have to make a choice to do what? To end life. I mean, that's a struggle. That you know, of course, with Israel, there was the reality of being God's nation, and he sent them to war, sent them to kill. And is there a right time for capital punishment? Yeah, sometimes it is, yeah. And unfortunately, I hate to say, I mean, really, in reality, a lot more time than happens in this country, you know, as far as God is concerned. when man sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. I mean, that's the reality. And yet we have cheapened life so much, I think, by our refusal to acknowledge that. And so men, you know, I mean, it's amazing how people just kill with wanton abandonment now. They don't think anything about it. They just kill people, and there's no understanding of the consequences or fear of the consequences. But, you know, there are difficult decisions to be made, you know, how these things approach our life, you know, balanced, of course, he says, with mending, you know, that there's a time to heal. You know, we have to think about that. We shouldn't always be in the kill mode, you know, or rarely in that. Hopefully more often in the heal mode, the mending mode, the, you know, bringing things back to where they should be. In tearing down, what do you think he means tearing down and building up? What could that refer to? Anybody have any idea? Because they say, you know, I mean, it might be, you know, you might see it in connection with, there it is, okay, I went too long, but there, you know, with the, well, kill and heal, break down and build up. They may be related. Yeah, Art?
I'm reminded of like Hosea 6, where it talks about, I've hewn you. God tears down in order that he may build up. He has to do that. We have to fail some tests that we are put in front of by God for us to see our faults, to fix them. You have to tear down.
You know, that's what I thought about. I wasn't thinking so much physically in a sense. I was thinking more, yeah, there are some things that need to be torn down, you know, in a sense, maybe, you know, who we are, some aspect of our life torn down so that it can be rebuilt. I mean, that's what happens in the military, you know. You think about the guys in boot camp, especially those guys in the special forces, they got to tear those guys down completely so that they can build them back up the way they want them to be. I'm not always sure that's great, what the end product, but, you know, because a lot of guys struggle with that. But in any case, in the end, that's the idea. You got to get rid of something so that you can put something, you know, hopefully better in its place. And you know, that can happen with, you know, God and trials and things and difficulties when we fail using those for our good. Any other thoughts? Somebody else? Okay. But then, again, I know I'm moving through these, but and I know I'm not doing near the job that Jeff would do, but he says there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Folks, I can just tell you, and surely you know, there's just highs and lows in this life. I mean, that's just the reality. Some of you that are young may not understand so much the weeping and the mourning. You know, we like the dancing and the, you know, the laughing far better. That's much more attuned to, especially our culture today. We love that aspect of things, and we tend to shun the other. And I know why. Why do we tend to shun the mourning, the weeping? It's uncomfortable. It hurts. It hurts when we have to do that. It's a struggle to deal with that. It's painful in our lives, and yet it is a natural occurrence of life. Why? You know, for one reason, there's a time to be born, you know, and there's a time to die. I mean, that's a reality of life. So there's going to be a time for joy and birth and mourning and weeping in death. That's just the way that it is. And that reality becomes more and more a factor in my life the older I get. You know, I see the end more closely than I've ever. I mean, unless I'm planning on living to 120-something years old, which I doubt that's going to happen, I've seen the majority of my years. I mean, that's just most likely, you know. And with that being the case, though, but what do I see in my life? I have sons, and now my son has had a son, and they're having another son. And, you know, life is coming in, and what does that bring me? Great joy. You know, I could focus on the fact that my years are getting shorter and become bitter, or I can be happy because life comes in that replaces mine. and goes on. Just as been true in my life with my parents and my grandparents, you see. So as he looks at this, understand, it's like Leah said, life's not always going to be sad. It's going to be happy at times too. Yes, Tricia.
And when we refuse to weep and mourn, and we push those emotions down, then we'll eventually pay for it.
Yeah, we will. Yes, because this is a part of life, and accept that. And when we refuse to accept that, it messes with us, especially our mental and physical as well. Now, this idea of time to gather stones together, a time, a time to cast them away, a time to gather them. Anybody have any thoughts of what that's talking about? Some of these are difficult to me to think about. Yes.
Well, I thought about just in a physical sense, the Israelites at times were told to gather stones for altars and that kind of thing, but then sometimes they were commanded to cast stones onto, towards enemies. And, that's an idea, and I thought, sometimes time to kill. Sometimes they had to stone people, casting stones like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when I was researching the castaway stones and the gather stones, it was another word for a weapon as well, like picking up stones, throwing stones at people. So there's a time to gather up weapons, prepare for something. There's also a time to lay weapons down.
Yeah. And I thought too about the gathering, there may be a time to build up defenses, to build, we cast certain things out of our lives, or sometimes people have to be dealt with, and then there's time to build up rather than, the defensive as opposed to the offensive. That could be something in relationship to this. And again, when we think about these things, how do these things affect us though? What's that saying to us? Yes.
I always took it as like a time to prepare and a time to use.
Okay. Yeah. There's times for preparing. There's times for action. We can prepare all day. It's kind of like we talked about sometimes. We have a lot of preparation for evangelism, and sometimes we think that's evangelism, but it's not. Preparing for evangelism is not evangelism. We prepare so that we can evangelize, and I think that's something we miss.
When I read that, I just kind of thought, he who's without sin cast the first stone.
Okay.
There's a time to show mercy, and there's a time to
Okay.
heal.
Yeah.
So you have to have that discernment, and I feel like that's what I thought.
Okay. And see, I can't sit here and tell you which interpretation is the right one, because Solomon doesn't tell us. He just says this is the case. Maybe they would have understood that perfectly. Okay, quickly, we've got to move.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the cause of this list for Solomon to say, I have something in mind for each of these and I want you to learn it. I think what he's saying is, if you read that, everyone in this auditorium has a place where they've gathered stones and they've got something in their mind and a place where they cast away. And he's saying that's a normal part of life, but in the context, you need to understand that it's all about enjoying the good things and understanding that the negative things in the context of God.
There's times to gather things too. You think about in my life, there's been times to gather, prepare, and then there's time to get rid of some of that stuff, Now that I'm getting older, when I had kids, I'm always preparing, I'm gathering for them. But now that I get older, I think, do I want to leave all that junk for my kids to have to deal with? So maybe there's a time as age gets older to put some of that away. You cast it away. It's not that important to hold on to it. But in any case, he says in verse 6, he says there's a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. Can anybody give me an example of that? And then we got to move on, man. We're at 25 after, and we're not even through this list. Okay. When might you embrace, and when might you refuse to embrace? Okay, Steve. So, I'm looking at somebody else. Yes, Tom.
When you comfort someone for some reason, you can embrace. But when it's time to go do a job, whatever that may be, you've got to let that go and go ahead and take care of what is needed at the time.
Yes, and I think in adding to that, is there any religious duty that, sometimes calls upon us to embrace, but sometimes to refuse to embrace?
Yeah.
What might that be?
It depends upon the spiritual condition of the one we're dealing with.
Yeah, you think of 1 Corinthians 5, and 2 Corinthians chapter 3. That this man living in adultery, or he had his father's wife. What does he say? Put him out from among you. Stop embracing this person. Stop receiving them, accepting them. But when this man repents of his sin and comes back, what does he tell him in chapter 3 of 2 Corinthians? To embrace them, to bring them back, to accept them. Don't keep them out from you. Don't keep them at arm's length because they have repented. And don't hold that against them now that he has turned from that. Embrace him. And so there, and I think we have to understand that that's, worldwide. I mean, worldwide. That's it covers all aspects of life and things, in that, it may not really matter, who we're dealing with. Sometimes that's, even with our own kids, that's a reality. There's just times if they don't live the way they should, there may come a time where you don't embrace. You've got to refrain, to get them to return back to God, because you can't show acceptance when their life is not acceptable. And so, these are just things that apply across the board, and different people have different aspects, thoughts of them. Verse 6, time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away. Again, some of these seem quite similar, there we go. Well, I'm just, this. You would think I have no tech savvy at all because I've got this new little pointer here and I don't know how to use it. But what do you think? A time to seek and a time to lose. Now, some translations present that differently. Anybody? Somebody? What do you think? Let me ask you. Are there things in life where did you lose that you may find and receive them back? Does that happen sometimes? Yeah. But does sometimes you lose things in life that you're not going to get back? Yeah.
Now, there's things you lose you don't need to get back.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. And I think the idea is, folks, you can't dwell forever and put your efforts into things continually that you're not going to get back. There's things lost in this life. For me, I can't dwell on every day. Because in this life, I'll not get them back. That doesn't mean I won't be with those things again, those people again, but I'm not going to get them back in this life, and we have to understand that. Yes, Daniel?
I think priorities change too, like there's things that in my 20s were super important to me.
Yeah.
That now in my 30s and about to be 40s, just don't matter anymore. So there are things I think that take precedence at certain developmental periods in our life, and then they're just not there.
Very, very good application. Didn't think about that. See, that's what's so neat about this. He doesn't give us what he's talking about, but you see that application. That's an excellent application. Anybody else? You think? Yes, Danny.
I just think about going to the New Testament, like verse 6, that whoever desires to lose his life will gain it.
Yeah.
For his sake, and seek
Yeah.
first the kingdom of God, all those kind of things. All that's a loss. Lose your entire life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Lose your gain in
Right.
some form.
Yep. I think we've kind of covered the last part of verse 6, time to keep, time to cast away. That kind of was covered earlier. A time to tear and a time to sow. Time to keep silent, time to speak. I see those as related. You may not, but what do you think? What does it mean, a time to tear? How could that apply? Are there some things that finally comes to a point you need to tear it away? What might that be? Anybody?
Relationships.
I heard relationships. Yeah, what did you say, Tom?
We need to tear ourselves away from bad relationships.
Okay, yeah, that's what, yeah. I think that's what I saw here. And that's just kind of what jumped out for me. There are times where relationships can be held on to one's own harm, can't they? And you just got to get out of that situation. And yet then there's times, to sew those up, to mend relationships that, because some people stay out of a relationship to their own harm. Because they refuse to deal with it, maybe to say they're sorry, to repent of the sin or whatever they've committed against someone, or whatever. That relationship is not being healed, and it festers. And so both of those can be true in one's life. And so, in either way, you can hold on to things to your own harm, or you can keep things away from you to your own harm. We got to be wise in making those decisions. What is the best thing to do as a servant of God? And the last part of verse 7, time to keep silent, and time to speak. I say that in relationship with, or in connection with relationships. Can sometimes you speaking mess up a relationship? Can it tear a relationship? Yeah. But let me ask you, is there a time to speak up even though you know it will tear a relationship? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes, we may need to be silent when somebody else is tearing into us, correct? Because, we're looking at the final end. Let them have their say. What can we do to be wise to mend this relationship? We really, I think we're much better at speaking maybe when we shouldn't, and keeping silent when we shouldn't than speaking when we should and being silent when we should. I really think that's the truth. It's much easier to speak when you shouldn't and be quiet when you ought to speak up than vice versa. And that's because, usually we're speaking in these situations because you're talking about me now. Now, wait a minute here. I got to defend myself, or, I'm embarrassed. I'm afraid to speak up when I should. Yes.
There may be a situation like Joe. His friends came and they didn't speak,
Right.
but they were there.
Yeah. Excellent. That's very, very true, Tom. Yeah, in certain situations, we don't have to say anything. It's better just to be silent. Yeah. When people, especially go back to people mourning and things, sometimes just better be silent. Yeah, I get that. Yes.
One of these, we ourselves might be more, like you said, we may be more tempted to speak up more of the time and keep silent. A lot of these, we can see one but not the other.
Yeah.
And this is a reminder that, hey, there's a time for that too.
Yeah.
And keeping silent and speaking, specifically, that, it's as you've said, we can be all too often tempted to speak up more than keep silent, but we apply all of these, just like we would that, because there's another side to it.
Yes.
Okay, it's easy for us to see, oh yeah, that makes sense to me, I see why we would do this side of it. That over there is a little more harder to do.
Yeah.
Well, this is a reminder we need both.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah. The good, the bad, the negative, the positive, those kind of things. Yeah, I agree. That's excellent. Okay. Last thing, he says, there's a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do you think about a time to love and a time to hate? Let me just start with the one jumping out there, hate. When is there a time to hate? What should you hate? Sin, yeah. Yeah, I think about that. We should love people. We should love good, right? Can there be both involved, love and hate at the same time? Yeah. Because we love people, but what sometimes do we hate about those people? What they're doing, their actions, yeah. The sin, in their lives. And so, although we love the people, what they do affects our relationship with them. We hate the actions, we love the people. And, those things come to play. I don't think we should ever love evil or ever hate good. but there's a time to hate what is evil and always a time to love what is good. And sometimes we love what is, people that are doing evil, but in hopes of getting them to do what's right, because we love good, we seek to get them to do what's right. All right, any other thoughts well, the last part of time for war, time for peace. I think about that peace. We like the peace far better, and it is better. But let me ask you this, is peace at all costs right? No, never has been. I'm going to ask, this is a trick question. Are we responsible for being at peace with all people? What's that? Okay, yes, that's why I say it's a trick question. As much as depends on us. We, Romans 12:18, as much as depends on you and me, be at peace with all people. But some people are not going to be at peace with us. There's just nothing we can do about that. And so, when that's the case, we don't, peace at all costs is not, not right because of that implies compromise and maybe of what is right and good in our stance, and we can't do that. All right, any other thoughts on this, 36 minutes later? Yeah.
I believe I had a misunderstanding of this for a long time, of these verses, because I felt like they were in a box, and they would happen separately, but they can happen so quickly in the same amount of time.
Yeah.
And that was really brought to light, like, when I had a death in the family and a birth in the family within 5 days.
Yes, there you go. Yeah.
Joy and sadness at the same time.
Yes, and the conflict in your brain as all of that is rushing through is extremely difficult, and I understand that. Yes, I can see that. Yeah, very, very difficult. Okay, well, Jeff's listening. We'll get as far as we get. Okay, let's move on. All right, 9 through 13. I think what we're seeing here in this particular passage section is he's really talking about God's involvement in man's life and how that relates, what we gain from that. Because in verses 9 and 10 he says, what gain has the worker from his toil? I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. Now, have we seen that first question before? Yeah, it's not new. Here it comes again, what's the point of our human effort if, as it points out, everything's cyclical, it comes and goes, there's this ebb and flow of all of it, and, no matter what I do, ultimately, it's not going to change those times and seasons, I'm going to be born, I'm going to die, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to be sad. It doesn't matter what I do, that's a reality. It doesn't matter how much money I might have, it doesn't matter how much I own, how much power I may gain, none of that changes that. And in fact, can oftentimes cause a problem with that, especially if that's your focus. It's not going to, life's not going to be exceptional for you. It's not going to, the rules aren't going to change just because, I have power or something like that. And so, all these things are, in many ways, are beyond our control. There's some things that are just going to be the way, our life is. And notice the basis of this question is verse 10, I've seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He's seen that. And I want you to notice, though, what's the key point in here? And he's going to get to it more in just a moment. What's the key point of verse 10? I've seen what? It's business, but what business? God has given. See, now God's in the mix here. See, this is what God has given. And so that begins to change our view of things. Yes, I toil, I work. What's the beauty of that? Well, let's step back and let's see God here. God has given me this job. And so how does that affect how I view the toil of my day? I can hate every moment of it. But then if that's the case, how am I viewing God and what He has given me? Is that the correct view? Or should I step back and see a different aspect of this? Because, this is all under God's hand, is what he's saying. He's the one in control. And therefore, as Danny pointed out in verse 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. When we step back from life, when we see that God is in control, what he's telling us, what Solomon is saying, is I can see the beauty in it now. God has made it beautiful. It's not, the fact that, you hear some people say, yeah, what you got to do, you work all your life and then you die. Well, yeah. But is that the way we look at it? Or was it a privilege to be able to work and to live and to eat and to eat and drink and enjoy? You see, what I'm seeing in so much of these passages that I have been struggling with is, you know what? The fact that I can go out in my yard and pick up sticks, I can either hate that I've got trees that fall, or I can say, it's a part of my life, and God's blessed me with trees. And when I got trees, limbs fall. Sometimes, like I told you last Sunday, right where you were standing, big ones, that would have killed you if you had not walked away. And that happened to me a couple weeks ago. But am I thankful that I walked away? Yes. I got to deal with the limbs. But you see, how I view that is going to turn whether I become a bitter old man or I'm become a joyful person that people look and say, Rodney has aged with grace. That's the guy I want to be when I'm older. Yes, sorry.
I like these verses. They're kind of a summary of the previous one,
Yeah.
where it comes up, and what he's saying is there's a framework to live life. And if you live in that framework, then all the things that happen will have a management to it. God has given you the ability to get through this, but it's funny, he uses those words. He goes, you see the business of man, yet, and he goes, but you have eternity yet, so you cannot find out. And then the next verse he said, there's nothing better. It's when you start trying to find beyond that boundary of what God's given us in this world, when you try to find something better in this world than what God has defined it, there's a definition of what's good in this world that is no greater and no lesser than what God has said. And if you understand that, you're going to live at peace with it.
I think that's the idea. God's given us enough. And what is perfectly right, no more, no less. Yeah, that was in my, that's what I'm seeing here. That there's this realm, this eternal purpose of God in what he has brought about, that if we live within that, and I'm not always looking for something better than what I have to make my life happy, because I can tell you, people that are always looking for that, you know what kind of life they live? A very sad life. Because they never have what makes them happy, because they never see what life is. And so, I'm sitting around thinking, well, okay, I got to go clean this, I got to take the garbage out. Well, okay, but I'm lucky that I can do that. It's part of life. It's just a task. Yes, Danny?
I just think, for this, we put it in context of eternity. It's not about the pile of stuff that you have.
Yeah.
Right? It's about the end product for God is the work.
Yeah. And in that idea, he's put eternity in our hearts so that we cannot find out what God has done. There's a lot of different, there's tons written on that idea. What is he talking about here? But, what I see in relationship to that is this. In every one of us, there's an eternal aspect. We're looking for something beyond this life here, this physical life that ends. And God has put that there. But the reality is, you can look at all of what has happened from the beginning to the end, and you're not going to find a satisfactory answer for that just from the standpoint of what goes on in the world. That doesn't answer the eternal, because what goes in the world comes and goes. It's not eternal. But when you look at God later, as he's going to say, and again, I'm just tell Jeff, I'm sorry, we didn't get very far. Well, halfway or a little over halfway, but when you look at all of this, you understand, see, God's the answer, because in just a minute he's going to say, everything God does is eternal, but not ours, yes.
But I was going to touch on kind of to what Art said, if you're just continually striving for something better, something greater, it says here in summary that you should take pleasure in your toil, and somewhere it says eat,
Yeah.
and drink, and be
Yeah.
merry, basically, and those are things that we enjoy every day, and I think when you rest and
Yes. Yeah, I mean, yes, and that's 12 and 13, to just live and do good. Do what the Lord says and enjoy the life you have. So if you've got a hamburger today, enjoy the hamburger. You may not have steak, I like hamburgers. And yet, I could be sitting there wishing it was a steak. Well, that's silly. Enjoy the hamburger, enjoy the, whatever you've been given. The fruits of your labor are there for you to do. Don't be wishing your fruits were more. Just enjoy what you've got. And that's a secret to life that I'm starting to learn. We're out of time, folks. We got to stop. It's time to end. I'm sorry, I just felt like it, unless I just blew through the first 8 verses, we were not going to get very far, but oh well. I really appreciate your discussion in all of this and hope there was something to be gained in relationship with it for you.